on a Sunday at home church. And I just love being a part of it. The songs, just how he and the people that are working with him have just brought so much together for this community to enjoy together. So if you get a chance, go to a different church one Sunday and then come back here. Do it. If you have not been to another church recently in the last 6 months, just pick a church, go through the yellow pages or go online and just go, I'm going to try this one in Langley today. And then come back to home church. And you will know what I'm talking about if you don't already. So I needed to say that, just because every time I come here, I keep thinking the novelty is going to wear off and it's just going to be, well, I'm just going to home church this week. But when I'm here, there's something cooking. Those good news stories, my goodness, that's exciting. Love that. Thank you for sharing that. So water into wine. That's not going to happen here today, ladies and gentlemen. As much as Pastor Jim pumped that up, I can't even do magic or sleight of hand. So there's going to be no transformation, nothing before your eyes that's going to change. But what I do want to talk about is containers. Now, I've brought a whole bunch of containers with me over here. And there's a bunch of different directions we could go this morning with this story of the wedding at Cana, Jesus changing water into wine. We could talk about the covenant of marriage. We could go back to the blood covenant and talk about the significance of wine. We could talk about a mother's authority. We could talk about Jesus and his disciples. There's a whole bunch of different directions we could go, but today I want to talk about containers. And the last couple weeks since I was here last, John in the first chapter has been talking about the nature of Jesus, light, flesh, the Word, dwelling amongst us. But right at the end of chapter 1, I love these words, the very second last verse, verse 50. Jesus says, "You believe because I told you I saw you under the tree," talking to Nathanael, one of the men that he called. But then he says, "You shall see greater things than that. I tell you the truth, you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending." And here we come into his first miracle, the first sign, and much, much more to come. Jesus takes some containers. And I want you to think, because I'm going to set you up for something at the end. If you were to consider your strongest personality trait, or maybe your greatest gift, a blessing, something that just flows out of you naturally, what kind of container would you be? If you were to consider that personality trait or a gift, what would it look like? Would it be a huge container? You need lots of room. That describes you and your gift or that personality trait. Or would it be something that maybe a lot of people don't know about? It's quite small, but it's there. It's significant. Maybe you're an old crusty jerry can that is really, really practical and functional, but maybe that personality trait or that gift isn't anything significant in the eyes of lots of people, but to you it's important, or to your family it's important. Maybe you're a container where it holds it, but it just comes out slowly, once in a while. It's got a real small spout. Or maybe you're this bucket, just overflows, easy to see, easy to fill, easy to empty. So I want you to think about what kind of container would suit me with that gift that I have, or that strong personality trait that is just part of who I am. And we're going to come back to that. Maybe your container's not even up there. Maybe none of those work for you, but you can imagine one that does. All right, we're going to go to Cana. And this is one of my great gifts that I just realized in the last 10 days. I'm really good at pylon art. And so I'm going to draw you a map of Israel using pylons, because I want you to get an idea of where Cana is. So if you have no visual in your mind when I say the country of Israel, if you can't even imagine that, or maybe you can, I'm going to help you out here. So I've got 3 colors that I'm going to use, and I want to show you where Jesus went, first of all, for this. Thank you. So I'm going to use all kinds of different spaces up here. I'm going to start by the Jordan River. So I don't know if you can visualize the Jordan River. And I'm going to go down the center aisle here a little bit. And the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea. When I was 13 years old, my father took me on a trip to Africa. And on the way, we stopped for a few days in Israel, and we happened to visit the Dead Sea. And I remember standing in the Dead Sea, like this, with my head above. And if you've ever heard about the Dead Sea, not a lot of fresh water flows into it, and the rate of evaporation, because it's in the bottom of a valley that's very, very dry, so much of the water evaporates and leaves salts and minerals behind that the water's heavy, it's dense. And you can do this in 10, 12 feet of water and not sink. You're extremely buoyant because of the density of the water. Out of that Dead Sea, the Jordan River continues a little bit. Way up here in the north is the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus did most of his ministry for 3.5 years, spent most of his life around the Sea of Galilee, and then the Jordan River continues up into the mountains. So now down the western side of the Dead Sea is a mountain range. It's not very big. When we talk about mountains, we're talking about, what could I compare it to around here? Maybe the North Shore Mountains in Vancouver. And they run along the west side of this body of water. So these red pylons are going to be my Judean hills, the western mountains in Israel. At one point, they kind of shoot out towards the Mediterranean. Mount Carmel, if you remember, Elijah and the prophets of Baal had their showdown on Mount Carmel. That's right over here by the music stand. And then they continue up here. And in the north, they actually climb and get really high. Mount Hermon is one of the tallest mountains. And that's where the Jordan River begins. So the blue is our bodies of water. And I guess to complete it, I'll just give you the Mediterranean coastline way over here by Tyler here. And that is the ocean. So we've got the Dead Sea, Jordan River, Sea of Galilee, and then finally, these are going to represent a couple of towns. Right down here in the south, just west of the Dead Sea, is Jerusalem, right on the edge of those mountains. And then up here, right about here, is Nazareth, where Jesus spent his childhood and youth. And about 3 hours walking distance is Cana. And then right at the top of the Sea of Galilee, the 3 towns, Bethsaida, Capernaum, and Chorazin, where Jesus spent most of his 3.5 years ministering to people. So that gives you an idea in pylons, the geography of Israel. So Jesus in this story, he goes from this pylon to this pylon. 3-hour walk from Nazareth to Cana. Now the chances are real good that he was a family member, some kind of a blood relative of the people that were getting married. Because you wouldn't walk that far for a friend. So the chances are real good that he was going there because he was related to someone. Now, weddings in Middle Eastern culture were very, very different. There's some similarities, but there's a lot of differences between how we would get married today and how they would get married in the first century in Middle Eastern culture. The groom, the day of his wedding, He had been fasting all day, as was his bride, custom of Middle Eastern culture. And in the morning, he would get on his best clothes, and he would begin to walk through the town of Cana. And as he would go, he would meet friends, he would greet people, and they would begin to follow him. And they would become the wedding party. And it was a community event. Everyone in the town would know that you were getting married. You can think of it today. We drive off in a car after our wedding. Maybe there's cans running behind, or the car's decorated and you're honking your horn. People know that there was just a wedding going on. But in Cana, this small town, everybody knew, because it wasn't a huge town, and because you physically walked through and you met people and you talked to people and they joined you. The groom would return to his own home where his family lived, and he would continue to prepare for his bride, get his house ready. In the evening, he would walk back through the town and find his bride. Meanwhile, the people are still with him, they're still gathering, and together the bride and the groom would walk from the bride's house to the groom's house. And again, people gathering, people coming, the house filling up, the yard filling up, and they would come there, and in the home of the groom, they would have the actual marriage celebration. After the ceremony, this is where it gets very, very different. After the ceremony, the bride and the groom would go to the groom's bedroom. Everybody's still in the house. In fact, two people, after the bride and the groom had gone into the bedroom, two people would stand outside of the door to ensure that nobody else went in the bedroom accidentally. And in that bedroom, two things would happen. One of them you can guess. They would consummate their marriage and begin a sexual relationship. The second thing they would do, which would be probably just as important, is that they would have a meal together, because they hadn't eaten all day. And they would share in a meal, and part of that meal would be drinking wine together. Once that period of time was finished, and I have no idea how long that would be, if it would be for the whole night, a couple of hours, I don't know, they would come out, and from that point on, 7 days of celebration would begin at that home. 7 days, not 7 hours, not our little 2-hour finger food receptions. 7 days of festivity. And in that 7 days, the number one beverage was wine. In fact, besides water, the only beverage was wine. And so there would have to be enough wine for them to last for 7 days. Now, if we go to Scripture, let's catch up with what's happening here. If we can go to the next slide. Verse 3. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." And you understand now why that was such a big deal. They have no more wine. Now, we don't know at what point in the wedding ceremony or the wedding celebration they were at. Somewhere in the middle. We don't know if it was the third day or the fifth day. We don't know. And Jesus replies, "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he says." Now, we can imagine and speculate that while Jesus was growing up, he did some pretty unusual things in his house. And Mom knew that there was something about her son that was different than anybody else. We could go all the way back to the angel visiting her, the Holy Spirit overshadowing her, all the little things that had happened as he was growing up. But in the everyday, there was probably some things that Jesus did where Mom just went, "Oh my goodness, here we go again with Jesus. Why can't he just be like his other brothers and sisters sometimes?" She knew that Jesus could provide something for this. So Mom steps in. My mother's here this morning. Her name's Darlene. She's been here once before. And I don't know if she remembers this story, but when I was about 9 years old, and she'll probably correct me on some of these details later, I think we were having a New Year's Eve party at our house. We had a house full of people. And in the kitchen, on the table, were the drinks. I think the food was in the dining room on a different table, but in the kitchen were the drinks. Big bowl of punch, and a big coffee urn. That's all I remember. There was probably other stuff, but big bowl of punch, big, probably 30, 50 cup coffee urn. For some reason, we didn't have an extension cord to plug the coffee urn in, so they had taken the cord and gone straight from the table to the wall plug. So the cord kind of looked like this, instead of going down to the floor and across. And me being 9 years old, I came in and went, oh, I could go around the table, but it'd be a whole lot more fun to go over or under the cord. And so as I went the first time to get my glass of punch, I went under. On my way out, I thought, I'm gonna go over. I'll straddle this. Should be really easy. Well, I was almost over except for the last couple toes. And you can see what happens. Down it went, the coffee urn full of coffee, over onto the floor, onto my foot. I yell because there's burning coffee on my foot. My mom comes rushing in, other people come rushing in. There's coffee all over the floor. I'm screaming and crying. So they attend to me first. We've got to take care of this young man. He might have blisters, who knows? He might have to go to the hospital. I was fine. Put it in cold water. It was all good. But the very next concern after my foot was tended to is, there's no more coffee. So there was punch, but in our culture, coffee's pretty significant. In the first century, in the Middle Eastern culture, wine was that beverage. So here's my question that I want you to talk to someone about as you're in the community time. What is it about wine, or what is it about coffee that is so significant that Mary would say to Jesus, there's no more wine, and that was a major crisis, or my mother on New Year's Eve would go, there's no more coffee. What is it about those types of drinks or beverages that if we run out, it's a problem? Talk to someone about that when you're enjoying your drink and your snack in the community time. All right, we'll see you back here in a few minutes. When the lights flicker, we will come back. When I was in the community time, where'd all the water come from? If Jesus turned all this water into wine, there must have been a whole lot of water there. And where did it come from? Well, the next part in the story is Jesus giving directions. And in verse 6 it says, nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. I had this in my backyard, and actually it used to hold wine. Not at my house, but it was given to me by someone who used to make their own wine. And I fill it up with water in case there's an earthquake. I don't think I've filled it for about 5 or 6 years because I've given up on the earthquakes. But I initially got this as my fresh water source if there was an earthquake. Back in the 90s, I got a little bit worried by all the media hype about the next quake. And so that's where this came from in my yard. But this is about the size of these jars. They would hold about 100 liters each, and there were 6 of them. Now, on the west coast of Canada, we have a very different understanding of water than Jews did in the first century in the Middle East. So let's talk about water for a moment as Canadians. I've got a little survey here that we're going to vote on. See what you know about water in Canada, because we are blessed. I don't know if you know that, but we are blessed with water here. So here's my first question. I'm going to give you 3 answers, and you're going to vote for answer 1, Answer 2 or answer 3. We've done this before. Here we go. What is the percentage of usable fresh water? So that means it's not frozen in ice. We can find it in rivers or wells underground or in lakes. What percentage of usable fresh water does Canada have compared to the whole world? How much usable fresh water do we find in Canada? What is the percentage? Is it 5% of the world's fresh waters in Canada? Is it 9%? Is it 12%? Here we go, one more time, and then you got to vote. 5, 9, or 12% of all the usable fresh water on the earth is in our country. What do you think, 1, 2, or 3? It's actually 2. But that's still a lot of water. 9% of all the usable fresh water on the entire globe is in our country. 35 million people out of what? 7.3 billion, and we get 9%. Which country do you think has the greatest percentage? There's a country that has twice as much of the world's fresh water, 18% of the water in their country. It's not Iceland. Any other guesses? It's not Russia. I'll give you a clue. They're playing an important soccer game there today. Brazil. Brazil has 18% of the world's usable fresh water. Amazon River. Here's question 2. The average Canadian, that's you and I, the average Canadian, how many liters of water would each of us use per day on average? How many liters of water would you use each day on average? More than 100 liters? Okay, remember this holds 100. More than 200? So 2 of these. More than 300 liters per person per day. 100, 200, 300. What's your vote? Over 300 liters. On average, you and I, for all of our different purposes, use about 3.5 of these a day. If you're living on the sub-Sahara region, north of the Sahara Desert or south of the Sahara Desert on the continent of Africa, how many liters of water do you think you would use a day for cooking, cleaning, drinking, everything? Any guesses? How many liters would you use if you were in that part of the world? 8, between 5 and 10 liters. Excellent guess. So my ice cream pail here holds just under 4. So about 2 of these. If you were living on the edge of the Sahara Desert, you'd get about 2 of these a day. Most of it would be for drinking, obviously, compared to 3.5 of those for us. Geography matters, ladies and gentlemen. Where you live, where you were born, really makes a big difference. Last question. When it comes to how we use our fresh water, which of the following do you think do we as Canadians use the most fresh water for each day? Is it for bathing, cooking and drinking, or laundry? Do we use the most water for bathing, cooking and drinking, or doing our laundry? What's your vote? 1, 2, or 3? Bathing, cooking and drinking, or laundry? Yeah, lots of ones out there. Bathing. When you take those showers or those baths, that's where most of our water goes. 35%. What do you think is the next biggest use of fresh water in our homes? And I didn't say it. Yes, the toilets. Flushing those toilets. 30% of the fresh water we use goes down the toilet. Literally. So, fresh water in the first century. I told you, I gave you that pylon art up here of the country of Israel. One thing I didn't tell you is that on the eastern side of the Jordan River And the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea is a desert. In fact, the Dead Sea itself is basically in that desert. And Cana, not in the desert, but close to it, a lot less water than we would have here. And so water becomes very important, and you would have large containers to keep that water, because there's no running water, obviously, in this part of the world at this time. And you would collect the water, and it would be used for washing. Most people are walking, and so when they enter a house, especially a wedding celebration, your feet are dirty. You're wearing sandals or nothing on your feet. First thing you do before you come into a home is not take off your shoes like we would do, but before you even come in, you would wash your feet. And so that would be the first purpose of these 6 big jars that had been holding water at the beginning of the marriage feast. The second thing is they would wash their hands. And you would wash your hands before a meal, during a meal, very, very important. And you would literally take water in a cup, and you would pour it on the tips of your fingers and let it run down to about your wrist. And then you would turn your hand this way and pour the water on your wrist and let it run down to the end of your fingertips. And then you would take your fists and you would rub so that the fronts of those hands were perfectly clean. And so the 6 water jugs that held about 600 liters in total had been used to wash. All those people coming to the groom's house had to wash their feet, had to wash their hands, and now these big containers sit empty. And these are the ones that Jesus says, go fill these up with more fresh water. So you can imagine the servants who did this are thinking, we've already washed. Everybody's clean. We don't need to fill these up again. Maybe one, because the odd person might have to clean their hands again, but these have already been filled. There's no purpose in refilling these containers now at the end. But Jesus says, go fill them up. They've run out of wine. Jesus is in the process of solving that problem. Why was it such a problem? Who can tell us? Why would it matter for me and my family to run out of coffee at a New Year's party, or for the marriage feast to run out of wine? What was the big deal? What is it about these beverages that are so important to us? Any ideas? Okay, you just need to drink. What else? Okay, Lana? Absolutely. To run out of a beverage would be humiliation for this family, especially at a wedding ceremony. It was honorable for you to be able to provide for the full 7 days. That was what was expected, and that is what you would want to do. Just as if you were having a barbecue this afternoon after church in your backyard, and you had a bunch of people over, and you run out of hot dogs, or you run out of hamburgers, and you're in the kitchen making peanut butter and jam sandwiches for the last 3. Right? That would not go well for you. What else?
Social lubrication.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you are standing with the drink in your hand of whatever beverage, not only does it help you create conversation, but it unites you in a conversation, because you're both sharing the same drink, or you've both got a drink in your hand. There is something you hold in common, and it allows conversation, relationships to foster. So beverages matter to us. Even if it's just a cold glass of water, if you share that water with someone else, you have a common connection. You can have a conversation, a discussion with them. So at the wedding, this becomes a monumental problem. And Jesus comes along, and he fills these up with water, or has them filled with water, and then, can I have the next slide, please? Then he told them, draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then they called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first and the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. Not only does he refill these with wine, but he puts something better in them. Something that wouldn't have been found in them to begin with, because it would have just been plain water. But the wine that comes out of them was better than what was already there. Taste matters. How many people here are Tim Hortons coffee drinkers? How many people, it's got to be Starbucks? Right? We love our coffee. We know when we get a bad cup of coffee. Or if you're a wine drinker or a beer drinker, you have your preference. You know what is a good glass of wine compared to something that is cheaper. And that's why we would rather go to Tim Hortons or Starbucks than McDonald's for our coffee. I know some people still prefer McDonald's, but I think they're just because they don't want to spend the money. I don't know. I'm not even a coffee drinker. I'm just speculating. So if I'm wrong, come and tell me. But we know that taste matters. I need 3 people to come up here and do a taste test for me. I have some water that I want you to try. I've got a green cup, and I've got a yellow cup. And I want you to, you don't have to drink the whole thing. I want you to sample from the green and the yellow and tell me which one you prefer. Which one is superior? Come on up. I need 2 more people. First 2 people up here, come up and just help me out here. So take them both. You can take as much time as you want. You can drink as much as you want. And then I want you to tell me which one you prefer. The green or the yellow? Because they should be noticeably different. Which one?
I like the yellow. It's cold.
Okay.
This is warm.
Okay. You like the yellow because it's...
The taste is a little better in this one, too.
Okay, so you like the yellow?
Yellow, it's cold.
Yellow?
Yellow.
Yellow. Now, the reason all of you like the yellow, I think, is for 2 reasons. It's cold instead of warm, and I added a little bit of flavoring, just a tiny bit. It's a little bit of a sweet tea, a Mio sweet tea. That's what you're tasting. So, thank you so much. That was easy, right? We know that taste matters, even when it comes to water. So something as simple as adding a tiny bit of flavoring and some ice cubes, we're like, yes, this is way better, 100 times better. I will choose this cup over the yellow or over the green cup anytime you offer to me if these stay the same way. When Jesus makes the new wine, it's clearly superior. There's no comparison. Everyone who tastes the wine, including the master of the ceremony, would taste the significant difference between what they had been drinking and what they now were drinking. Let's come back to our containers. Jesus takes an old container that had a different purpose, was used just for plain old water for washing people's feet, and he puts something incredible into it that completely changes the circumstance that's going on at the wedding feast. Not only does he save the family from humiliation, but he shows not only can I give you what you need, but I will give you something even better that you didn't realize that you needed or could have or would desire. At the beginning, you picked a container, or you thought of a container that represented you. I want you to imagine that container, if it's not up here, if it has to be something different, and I want you to imagine yourself, and you're putting in that container that great part of you, that trait, that great sense of humor, your encouraging attitude, your gift of music, your love for books, you like working on old cars, whatever it is, that passion, what is it that defines you that is very obvious to yourself and to people that would know you? I want you to put it into that container that you picked. And the second thing I want you to do is I want you to think of the person in your life that would represent a broken or neglected or forgotten relationship. Every single person in here has one of those people. Someone you haven't seen for 10 years that you miss. Someone that you live with and your relationship is strained. Maybe something happened this morning. Maybe it's been ongoing. Maybe it's someone at work that you can't stand working with. Think of that person where that relationship just isn't right. And you'd like it to be right. It might take a lot of work, but you know that the way it is right now this morning is not the way it should be. I want you to find a way today, if possible, to hand them your container with that piece of you, that passion, and say, this is the way that I can begin to restore this relationship. A joke I can tell you, a song I can share with you, something I can help you with, a word of encouragement, whatever it is, whatever you put in this container that represents you, can you hand it to that person? That's the metaphor I want to create here this morning. And maybe it begins with a text, an email, a phone call, writing a letter. How would you get that going? I'm a teacher. I have parents who come into my classroom fairly regularly to talk to me, and about once a year one comes in and just tears a strip off me, just up and down. How dare you do this? You can't do this to my child. This isn't fair. And usually for the rest of the year, when I see that parent, you're just kind of tiptoeing around and trying not to make eye contact and hoping they don't say anything and hoping things are going well since. And there's times where I have to find a way to come back to that parent and restore that relationship. And sometimes it's very difficult because I know they still are unhappy with me. We all have that person that we can think of right now. Jesus takes an old container, had water in it for washing your feet, and he puts something beautiful in it that changes the lives of people. And he says, here it is. The party can go on. Find a way to begin to restore that relationship with that family. What can you give them with that person?